Alright, welcome to part 2. This was definitely not filmed straight after part 1, but yeah, so we're going to be creating an Xcode project. So the first thing we're going to need is Xcode. Actually, no, the first thing we're going to need is a Mac. So if you don't have a Mac, I'll wait on you. You can go and buy one. Once you've got your Mac, then we're all sorted. We need to go and download Xcode. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to go to the App Store, and we're going to search for Xcode. So it should be the top result when you search for Xcode, and I've already installed it. It's currently, at the time of filming this, Xcode version 11.4 just got released this week. So yeah, you might have a slightly newer version of Xcode. It might be Xcode 12 by the time you're watching this, in which case a lot of things might be different. We don't really know yet. So yeah, I've already installed it. Once you've installed it, you'll be able to open it. So we're going to open it now. If it's the first time you've installed Xcode, you will probably be prompted with another install notification where it'll ask you to install some additional components. Not really sure what those additional components are. By default, just the download size for Xcode alone is 8.1 gig, so you will need a sizable amount of space free. So if you've only got a couple of gig left on your Mac, then you might have to delete a few things. But yeah, once you've got it installed, it'll ask you to install a few more things. Once you've done that, you should be presented with this page. I'm just going to hide out of this stuff here. Close that so you can let it down. Yeah, you'll be presented with this page here, which is, as it says, welcome to Xcode. I didn't expect that to move. Welcome to Xcode. So, yeah, down the right-hand side here, we'll have a list of apps that you've previously worked on. So if you've already done some stuff with iOS in the past, then you'll have some things here. If not, this will be empty. And then on the left-hand side here, we actually have a few options on creating projects. So I'm not going into much detail about what playgrounds are or cloning a repository. But the one we're interested in is create a new Xcode project. So if we click on that, we'll be presented with a page like this. So this is the basically template selection page for creating an Xcode project. So by default, Apple have a bunch of pre-made templates for different platforms. So we have iOS, WatchOS, macOS, tvOS, and cross-platform. The one we're interested in is iOS. Although you could potentially make a macOS app in SwiftUI, we're just going to make it, if you want to follow along 100%, we'll make an iOS app. So here we have a bunch of templates. So the most basic one being single view app. As the name suggests, it's a single view. It is just the bare minimum to have an app. It's got no content, nothing on it. It's just an empty white screen when you run it. We have some augmented reality stuff, document-based app, master detail app, which is actually very similar to what we're going to be doing. It's a list table view. And then when you tap on one of the rows, it'll present a view with some information on it. We also have a tabbed app that you could use, which if you've ever seen an iOS app with tab bar along the bottom, it basically creates a version of that. We're going to be sticking with single view app. You can create one of these if you want. It will come pre-configured with some of the information, like some of the UI elements already in place for you. But it's not that difficult to do it yourself, and you'll learn more doing it yourself than just creating a tabbed app, for instance. It's much more... if you have to think about it and actually create a tab bar application yourself or a master detail app yourself from the ground up, you get a much better understanding of how it actually is supposed to work. So we're going to create a single view app and build everything ourselves. So when you double click on that, you'll be presented with this page here where you can fill out some information about the app. So first things first, we're going to create a name for it. So if you name it SwiftUI Weather App. We have a team here. Now, what I'm not 100% sure on is if you've just downloaded Xcode, if you have a team, you can have it set to none, which may be the default for you. I have a team because I have an Apple developers account. So if you don't have a team, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make any difference. The only thing you might not be able to do is run it on a device. But you'll have an organization name, which you can fill out. If that's blank, just fill out your name or something in there. Organization identifier. Now, what this does is it creates a bundle identifier for your app. Now, a bundle identifier is basically a unique identifier for any Xcode project, any iOS app. So whenever you upload an app to the App Store, the most important thing isn't the name. The name doesn't really matter, although you can't have two apps on the App Store named the same thing. You could have two projects named the same thing. What is important is that this identifier here is unique to you. So if you were to try and upload an app with the exact same identifier as somebody else, so if you were to just take all this out and just do test dot and then app, if that was your identifier, that's not how you spell test. Test.app. If you were to do that and somebody else already had an app named that for some reason as their bundle identifier, you would not be able to upload it. So it needs to be unique. So now we have this back where it should be. As you'll see here, what it does is it actually appends the product name to the end of our organization identifier. Now, Apple recommend for any bundle identifier that you use the reverse domain name notation. So what that basically means is if you imagine a website URL, you'll have www.something.com or .org or whatever. So they recommend reverse domain name notation, which effectively, rather than being, for instance, www.stuartthompson.com, you would be com.stuartthompson.www. And that www you replace with the name of your application. So in this instance, it's com.stuartthompson.SwiftUI weather app. Next option we're going to make sure is set selected to Swift. This is the language of our application. So we could do Objective-C, but that's the really old way of doing iOS apps, so we're going to make sure it's set to Swift. For our user interface, we're going to make sure that we have SwiftUI selected and not Storyboard. Storyboards being, again, the older way of doing UI. We're going to be making sure we use SwiftUI for this example, for this tutorial. We're not going to use Core Data for this. Core Data is Apple's way of storing information. It's highly complicated and really frustrating to use, so we're just going to ignore that for the time being. What we are going to make sure is we've got unit tests and UI tests ticked. We're not going to use them, but just having them there is a good idea for any application, because if you want to write tests in the future, it makes it much easier if you've already got classes, if you've already got the test targets in place and you don't have to add them. So we're just going to leave them ticked, and we're going to hit next. And the next page we'll be presented with is this, which is basically just where we select where we want to actually store the project. So, to be honest, it doesn't really matter where you put it, as long as you remember where you put it, but Xcode does a pretty good job of remembering where it is anyway, so you don't actually really have to care. As long as it's somewhere not completely ridiculous. Don't put it in your trash, for instance. What we are going to make sure is that we've selected this source control option down here. Now what that does is it creates an empty Git repository, or a default Git repository in the location of our app. Now what Git is it's basically a way of storing incremental changes to your project. So you could, for instance, add a new page and then commit those changes so that in the future, if you made some changes, you could revert back to that point. So for instance, if you came up with this wonderful new feature you wanted to add to your app, you could get halfway down the path of doing it and realize, actually, this isn't a great idea, this is not a feature I want to be adding. And rather than having to unpick all of the changes you've made manually, you can just revert to the previous version of your app, which makes things a lot more simple. And it's something a lot of people don't talk about much when you're initially starting doing app development, is nobody really mentions the fact that Git is a really powerful tool. I went through 4 years of university, and I think we did a 2-hour lecture on Git, which, it wasn't really enough. It's a really powerful tool. I just recommend that you have it enabled. We're not going to do much with it, but as long as it's enabled, then it gives us that option in the future. So once you've got everything set up there, you just hit create, and it'll build our Xcode project for us. Okay, so this is our Xcode project. So once it's created for you, you'll have, down the side here is your file hierarchy. So at the very top of that, we have our project file, which is just named the same thing as you named your app. So in here we have a bunch of settings that we can change, a load of settings that we can change. I highly recommend you don't change anything in build settings. You're more likely to break something than you are to fix anything. But underneath general, it's relatively safe to change some stuff in here. So, for instance, you can change your target iOS level. We're going to make sure that it's selected to one of the 13 levels, otherwise you can't use SwiftUI, so it'll need to be 13.0 or higher. What we're going to do is unselect landscape left and landscape right on our device orientation options, because our app's just going to be a portrait app. It's just going to be, it's not going to be rotatable in any way. You also have a few options around status bar and stuff like that. Once we've done that, we'll jump into back to our file hierarchy here. So underneath our project file, we'll have this group here, which is effectively just all the code and items you need to build your app. Underneath that, we also have a couple of groups for tests and UI tests. Now, again, we're not going to go into any detail on testing because it's not something that we're going to be doing in this series. I may have a video in the future around testing, but for the time being, just having them there makes it possible to do that stuff in the future. But we're just going to close those down and just not really talk about them. So if we go back to our app project at the top, our app folder at the top here, we have an app delegate. Now, what an app delegate is it's the first place of entry for any application. So this method here, this did finish launching with options method, is the first method that you will get called with when your app actually launches. So if you have any initial state or setup you need to do, you would put it in here. So if you are using third-party frameworks, for instance, if you've got Facebook integration, they'll tell you to put a method in here which will initialize the Facebook SDK so that you can then use it. So yeah, effectively you have any setup you need to do right at the start of your app, you'll put it in that method. We also have this scene delegate here, which is, I'm not going into much detail, but what a scene delegate allows you to do is have two apps running side by side. So, or I say two apps running side, but two versions of your app running side by side. So an example of this is you could have two versions of Safari, one on either side of the screen on an iPad, and you can be scrolling on different pages and interacting with it completely separately from each other. We're not going to use it really. It's not something that we're doing. We're just going to be focusing. In fact, if we go back to our app settings here, we're just going to uncheck iPad because we're only interested in supporting iPhone. Although this app could work fine on iPad, we're not that interested in it. But yeah, effectively, this doesn't really do much on an iPhone. It's really just an iPad thing. What we are looking at here is this is the actual creation of our app. So what we do is we create a view, and then we create a window, and we set our content view as the root view controller of the window. And then we set the window, this make key invisible method here is what actually makes the window visible to the device, to the user. So without calling this, you would just end up with a black screen, nothing would show. So that needs to be called, but this is all done for you by default. There's no need or reason to really edit any of this. It's just useful sometimes to know what a UI window is and how it works. But yeah, underneath that we also have this content view, which is our actual view. This is a SwiftUI view. I'm not going to go into any detail because the next video will actually go into what SwiftUI is and how it works. We also have an assets catalog, which has an app icon, which has no app icon in it. But any time you want to add a image to your app, you'll add it into this assets catalog. And you can also add colors and things in here. And then underneath that, we also have this launch screen storyboard. Now, even though we're using SwiftUI, we do have this storyboard for just the launch screen. Now, when it opens up, it'll just be a blank screen. And what you could do is you could actually add some stuff in here. It's completely static, it's not interactable, it's just the screen that's presented when your app first opens. So that it'll basically be a loading screen, and then once the app is fully loaded, it will then transition into whatever the first screen is that you pass in here. So in our situation, it will just be this content view. So we end up, when we run this, we'll have this empty white screen, and then we'll have the content view, which just has some text that says "Hello World." So you'll see a white screen, and it'll transition into "Hello World." And then we have our info key list, which again is just some information about our app, which can also be actually accessed through here if we go into info. It's basically exactly the same information. And then we have this preview content, which is, again, it's got an asset catalog, but nothing in it. We're not going to talk much about that. It's just some stuff you can use for previewing SwiftUI views, which we'll get into in the next episode. So that's pretty much it. That is the default app that's created when you first start your Xcode project. If we run this, you'll see we end up with a white screen transitioning into a screen that has Hello World written on it. So yeah, just hit run, wait until it builds successfully. It'll launch a simulator for you. This will take a couple of seconds to boot up. Here we go. Right, so as you see, white screen, nothing on it, and then we should transition once the app fully loads to a screen that says Hello World on it. Hopefully. Some point in the future. Anytime now, it'll do it. Any second now. Any moment. Recording both this webcam and screen at the same time as trying to run an iOS app, not a great idea, but you know, we're getting through it. Anytime today, would be nice. There we go. There you go. So that is our app. So it just says hello world. That's it. That's all you get out of the box. So anything else you want to do, you're going to have to build it yourself. But that is an iOS app running on a simulator. Yeah, that's basically it. So if you've had any questions about that, leave it down in the comments. I'll try and reply to as many as I can. I say that, I'm not going to get any comments. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Join us again for the next episode, where we talk about SwiftUI, what it is, how it works, and how Xcode works with SwiftUI. Until then, see you later.